Okay. Well, we've sort of broken down some of our critiques, and I'm just gonna put another plug in. People like buy this book, read it. Climate Change is Class War. It really, it's a great read. I always say when people say it's a quick read, but it's a very exciting read, and you don't have to spend too much time going through all of it. And also another quick plug, very good, I think, introduction to a lot of just basic Marxist concepts as well.
Mm.
Um, but so we've criticized degrowth and the kind of neoliberal model and some of the PMC stuff. What would a working class climate politics start to look like?
So I think I already kind of spoiled it by talking about that proletarian ecology, but the fact
Hmm.
that um, the Green New Deal, like I did feel like the Green New Deal was kind of a breakthrough because it was finally the climate politics that was finally talking about like this is a program that's going to improve your life. It's going to make your
Hmm.
life better. It's going to have things like a job guarantee, have things like more paid vacation time, and like imagining a shorter work week. The thing uh, that I like, like I think it's really important that it's called the Green New Deal because it harkens back to the New Deal itself, which
Hmm.
was probably the height of working class and left power in this country, and the ways in which that program was fundamentally about mobilizing public investment to improve masses of people's lives directly. Um, Obviously through like the National Labor Relations Act and union rights and things like that, but all Social Security and all the rest. But what's really inspiring about the New Deal was fundamentally an energy program.
Hmm.
They set up the Tennessee Valley Authority and uh, built out massive hydroelectric dams, and basically electrified the whole countryside in the United States, which didn't have electricity. And you want to talk about austerity. I mean, like these farms without electricity, the manual labor that it took to just do basic tasks and just horrific. And bringing electricity was truly liberating um, to the toil of rural people. And in 1934, 10% of farms had electricity. By 1950, it was 90%. So they just fundamentally electrified the countryside. I know you'll like this, David, because your country music. But Woody Guthrie, they hired Woody Guthrie to sing folk songs
Yeah.
about the Columbia River, doing work for the people, and they, like this very like sort of populist and positive vision of improving people's lives through electricity. The Tennessee Valley Authority's slogan was "Electricity for All," which is what we talk a lot about: Medicare for all, whatever for all. And so that was really exciting to me, to try to sort of take inspiration from the New Deal to kind of do this Green New Deal. Um, of course, the problem is that for the kind of Green New Deal theory of change, the whole theory of change is like you're going to start to deliver these material benefits to people's lives under the name of climate action. And then you're going to start to build support for those types of
Mhm.
programs, and you start to stitch together kind of popular majorities. And I think they were hoping that they could sort of start to build a kind of left realignment of politics, like we saw in the 1930s, or we saw a rightward realignment in the 1970s. But if you don't win power and you aren't able to deliver those material gains, no one's going to believe in the Green New
Mhm.
Deal. No one's
Mhm.
going to think it's realizable, and people are just going to be cynical and resign that this is not really going to happen. So there was this like big high level gambit on power. I think it's pretty clear Bernie Sanders was like the Green New Deal candidate, and he lost, right? And
Mhm.
and we got stuck with Biden. And you look at what Biden's doing, and it has it, and even what he tried to do for climate, most of it got killed, right? It's not going
Mhm.
to even happen. But even if they got the Build Back Better Act, almost all of that was not big public projects and public job guarantees. It was private sector tax credits. It
Mhm.
was
Mhm.
basically tax credits for private renewable energy capitalists to save us, right? And still today, John Kerry and Janet Yellen are constantly saying government can't solve this problem. It's the private sector that has to do the investing. They have to solve it. And it's just like we're in this doom loop of the Democratic Party that people get hopeful when we're going to get a new Democrat in there, and then they get in there and it's just complete disappointment because they're not rising to the challenge, really.
Imagine Pelosi in like 1932 being like the green, the new dream or whatever it's called. Like,
it's not going to happen, Franklin.
No, but I mean, this is one of the big challenges I think that we find ourselves in as the left, sort of, post Bernie, at least for now, trying to rebuild these movements. Because, I talked to a lot of my union friends here who, are people who believe in, the ideas of the Green New Deal. But they say when they talk to their other friends, like, they like the idea of a just transition, but they're like, it's all bullshit. Like, no one's ever shown up for us. And like, I've been working on a piece, we'll see if it ends up happening, on Texas over the past couple of years, making the argument that like Texas is a preview of our climate future, and particularly focusing on what oil and gas workers experience. Because, in the pandemic, when you started to see these shutdowns in production, they saw exactly what will happen. Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
The CEOs are taking care of, the people who work in the offices or Houston are taken care of, and fuck y'all, figure out something on your own. And we have to be there, finding a way to actually show up materially in their fights right now. I mean, in Beaumont, Texas, there was a company lockout of USW workers that was like 9 months long, and a very significant attempt that almost won to decertify the union. Like, that's the state of organized labor right now. In that industry in Texas. And like, for people who are listening to this, wherever you're at, but particularly in Texas, like, you got to show up for these people now if you want them to believe that we want to build this, and then also that we might have the power to deliver that in the future. Because I do agree that that's the model. And like, some of the big questions of socialist politics right now are also getting people to believe that we can do it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when Bernie lost, it kind of felt like, well, we have to, it felt, unfortunately, I think Bernie felt sort of like a shortcut. Like, we're going to,
he was a Hail Mary.
We're going to win power at the presidential level of the core of empire. And then Bernie's going to kind of awaken a kind of working class movement from the decades of slumber. But that's not typically how it works. It's usually working class organization, unions, and other institutions embedded in communities that build themselves up first, and then you might be able to win sort of electoral power. The just transitions just become, unfortunately, kind of like an NGO slogan that, like, well, what are you going to do about the fossil fuel workers? Just transition. You just sort of shout it, but there's not a lot of details. And as you said, there's no existing just transition for coal workers or oil and gas workers when they do get laid off, which they have been. And especially coal workers, the unions that represent them are like, don't tell us about any just transition. All we see is unemployment and devastation. Right. So you have to go back to the founder of the concept of just transition, which is a guy named Tony Mazzocchi, an incredible union leader and also environmentalist who helped organize unions to fight for their health and safety and he's the vice president of the Oil and Chemical and Atomic Workers Union. And he basically built a mass movement on basically toxic exposure in chemical factories in the workplace, and helped pass, basically single-handedly with his union, helped pass the Occupational Health and Safety Administration. And he came up with the just transition in the early 90s. He had this hilarious way of putting it that he said, we should treat workers as well as we treat dirt. Because the EPA set up super fun things where they put all this money into cleaning up the dirt, and they invest in cleaning up the land. But what about the workers who are left behind from these toxic industries? We should take care of them as well as we take care of dirt. But he had a model for his idea of a just transition that he lived and he experienced, and it was the GI Bill. He was a World War II veteran, and he and 13 million other veterans took advantage of this extremely expansive welfare state program that gave people income supports and free education to transition out of the war economy into the civilian economy. And that, he said, if we can do that for veterans, we can do that for people in these dirty industries, and actually give them real material support to transition them. And so he envisioned like a real serious expansion of the welfare state to transition workers. And I do think if we were to set up something like that, workers would believe in a just transition. But that, as you all know, that takes power to win that kind of just transition, where you would vastly expand the welfare state. But if we could do that, that would be the type of thing that could actually convince these workers that there is something called a just transition.
Well, you make this argument in the book, and in a lot of ways it's obvious, because when we're talking about climate change, what's creating that, it's the way that we are producing energy and doing that kind of socially necessary work, getting people to work, keeping the lights on, keeping your house warm, cooking your food. And you make the argument that we really need to be talking about public power. Could you sort of break down, one, why it's so important, as a transition model, and also like what that really means in practice too? Because when people hear public power, they just think of utilities, right? And you're talking about something very different here.
Well, to take a step back, like essentially, like climate and analysts know, like, to decarbonize our economy, it sounds like we have to change everything. It's going to be so complex and crazy, but it actually is really simple. We have to basically decarbonize the electricity sector. That's the core. And then you electrify everything else, like the things like the cooking of the food, the driving, if we can get electric cars, public transit, you can actually move towards electric sources of heat. You can move towards electric industrial applications. And so this electrify everything strategy basically means that electricity is at the core of the whole struggle, right? And when you start to look at that, yes, we need basically, like, we have all these really horrible. The good old John Oliver just did a segment on electric utilities and how they're these profiteering, investor-owned, corrupt, horrible capitalist things. And so public ownership of these utilities would be one way to kind of start to make these electric utilities where their primary goal is not profit and shareholder wealth, but like decarbonization. And also I would add, like, trying to deliver cheaper energy because I didn't mention that was the big thing about the New Deal. They weren't just about delivering energy to the farms. They were about delivering cheaper energy. And that's super important. So public power, cheap energy plus decarbonized power, like it could be a real, I think, catalyst to the decarbonization challenge. But to win that, I think you need to think about who has the power in this electricity system. And again, no surprise to socialists, but the workers in this electric utility system are some of the most unionized in our entire economy. The electric utility sector is got about 25% union density. And these are skilled, highly knowledgeable workers who work in a very dangerous occupation. And these unions are, basically, I think, if you look at public power campaigns in the socialist space today, and you look at environmental climate politics that focus on this electrify everything, there's not a lot of engagement with these unions, right? With these workers, because there's these unions, let's be serious, like, they can be conservative. Some of them might be Trump supporters. That they have very kind of top down, trade union bureaucracies and all that stuff. But I think a lot of the, again, quite PMC climate movement just sort of sees these unions as problematic and bad and can't deal with them. But you're not going to win a transformation of this sector unless you get these unions on board. And so we really need a strategy to engage with these unions, win them over, but also put them in the driver's seat of kind of the policy directions and the kind of And again, because these workers know more than any of these NGO types about how electricity works. They really know, and they also really care. Like they take pride in like delivering this this vital service to human beings. Like if the lights go out, as you all learned in Texas, and the lights go out, it's deadly. Like, and they want to keep the lights on, and they really care about that, about things like grid reliability, and so these workers are the ones we need to win over. And what I suggest in the book is that if we want to win them over, we have to make the case that if they don't start thinking strategically about how to make sure these unions are at this core of this energy transition, then those unions are going to be destroyed by a sort of renewable energy, green capitalism powered by Wall Street, because that's like renewable energy is very anti-union right now.
Yeah.
It's got very low union density. So if we're just going to let Larry Fink and BlackRock sort of churn us to the renewable energy transition, it's gonna really eviscerate these unions. And so if they really need to start thinking about how can we build a program that will put unions at the center of this. And it's nice that Biden says, we're going to create a lot of union green jobs, but you actually need like mandates. You need project labor agreements. You need unions right at the seat at the table when you're looking at these new projects. And so I think socialists can actually start to work with these unions. Even, socialists have been becoming teachers to do a rank and file strategy to kind of like radicalize the unions from the. Well, these unions, I think, are ripe for that, for like climate concerned socialists who want to kind of organize within these unions to try to push them to have a green energy transition strategy that can forestall this renewable energy Wall Street capitalism that's coming.
And like when it comes to public power, and like I would like I really appreciate you spending time with us, and we don't want to keep it too much longer, but I definitely want to hear you sort of juxtapose the kind of small boutique or like small is beautiful kind of power versus industrial scale. But just wanted to note, like here in Texas, it's very frightening because one, you talk about union stuff. Some of the worst jobs in electricity right now are doing household solar installation. I mean, those guys, like their contracts are horrible. It's based on how many panels you're installing. You have like one guy, risking life and limb to try to do as many as possible. So there's that, but also, there's an interesting thing where you get some of this like environmental left or whatever we want to call them, sort of agreeing with like a Republican right, because Texas is a state that has deregulated electricity. So it's all about electricity choice, right? And what that's meant is that unless you're in a place like Austin, and like a few cities in Austin still have like public power, but other places they have, public power in the sense it's, community owned to some extent, not necessarily what we really want. But anyway, what I can definitely see happening, and you're starting to see it happening, is that like Westlake or like the wealthy neighborhoods, they have their nice grid, and then the rest of us are stuck on, this kind of dirty, expensive production, and also production that has no real incentive to actually produce. Because like I make this point all the time when people talk about what happened here when the power went out, right? Yes, they didn't weatherize the pipes, right? But why did they not do that? Because it's cheaper for them to lose profit for 3 days or whatever in a freak storm than it is for them to make sure that the lights don't go off in the energy capital of the world, right? I mean, there's the actual like physical question, like the logistical question of like how to keep power, but there's the democratic question where it's like these people don't actually care about making sure that they produce for you. Anyways, I know I just gave you a lot, but I do see this trend, and it makes me worried. And just like one last thing, I've been doing a lot of reading on this, and like the worst bit is like from these environmental liberals is there is this like retreat from politics on it, right? I read a piece in the Houston Chronicle a couple of years ago, and it was like, there's been a big boom in household solar, and they were interviewing people, and the guys were just like, yeah, I don't think the government's going to do anything, so I'm just going to do it for myself. And like, That's doom politics right there. That's end of the world kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, you actually find a lot of Tea Party types who love solar power. They love this idea of getting off the grid and not relying on anyone but their own self, so they can get an Elon Musk power wall, which is a battery that your solar panels will charge during the day, and then you have the battery at night. So like there's this incredibly sort of individualistic libertarian streak that really likes this sort of propertied, solar paneled, petty bourgeois subject. And it's just very cool to, again, a traditional left vision of big public goods that benefit everyone universally, right? And it's quite an interesting story when you look at basically in the 1970s, as capitalism started to really shift toward this neoliberal model, it started to villainize everything that was sort of big and centralized. So unions, government spending, welfare programs, all this kind of big forces needed to be destroyed and cut down, and utilities were one of them. And so these big sort of vertically integrated investor-owned utilities were seen as like too inflexible, and they needed to be broken up. And so that's where you got deregulation. And as you said, it happened in Texas. It happened in New York State, actually. And what they did is they said the production of electricity, we're going to throw that to the market. We're going to get all these, not just one utility that manages production. You're going to get all these different competition. Let's see who can do it cheaper. And they're called merchant generators. So you're going to have all these merchant generators kind of competing to sell power on the wholesale market. And that was what allowed small scale renewables to enter the market, was deregulation, by making it viable for these small scale generators to get into this highly competitive market. The other thing, wrote a piece with Fred Stafford about this called In Defense of the Tennessee Valley Authority. And we've learned that there's this insane, I mentioned before, Biden, all his policies, tax credits, but there's this long history of the only way we incentivize renewable energy production in the United States was through very lucrative tax credits. So essentially, like wherever you have renewables development, it doesn't make sense for public power or like the TVA or any public entity to do these because they can't get the tax credits. Only private capital can take advantage of those. And so, and what they do is they sell the tax credits to what are called tax equity investors, which are the richest people on the planet, like Warren Buffett and Bank of America, Goldman Sachs. And the people that they're really looking for tax shelters, looking to shield their income from taxes. Warren Buffett famously said, the only reason to build a wind farm is to get the tax credit. It's the only reason we do it. And so, you may have heard like Nebraska is 100% public power, but 100% of the solar and wind production in Nebraska is private, and it's all done by these merchant generators, what are called independent power producers. And they're selling into these publicly owned grids, right? But it's crazy. Like basically, if you want to do renewables development in this country, it's got to be private, and it's got to be on this tax credit model that really benefits the richest people in the whole economy.
Yeah, I mean, Lord in heaven, I really appreciate you coming on here, Matt. The book is Climate Change is Class War. There's a hell of a lot more we could get to. We always learn so much speaking with you, and I think we just might have to do this again sometimes because, I mean, this stuff touches literally everything from, the lights to political power and what the left should be doing. I highly suggest people check out the book and give it a real read. Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate you spending a portion of the evening with us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for the kind words. It means a lot.